Jared Atadero, October 2nd, 1999, a date forever etched into the life of the Atadero family. The Big South Trail in the Colorado mountains promised nothing more than a peaceful autumn morning. The river whispered softly, and the wilderness seemed wrapped in calm, but within hours, that calm would transform into a family's darkest nightmare. Two fishermen casting their lines by the river spotted something unusual. A tiny boy, no older than 3, wandering alone in the wilderness. His face was calm, curious, almost playful, as if he were strolling through a neighborhood park. Yet, here he was in the middle of a vast and unforgiving mountain range. Moments earlier, a group of hikers appeared along the trail. Relieved, the fishermen assumed the child must belong with them. They called out, exchanged a few words, and watched as the boy happily ran toward the group. Convinced all was well, the fishermen turned back to their rods, never realizing they might have just unleashed a tragedy. The boy's name was Jared Atadero, and this would be the last time anyone saw him alive. His father, Alan Atadero, a divorced man raising Jared and his 6-year-old daughter, Josalyn, had welcomed members of a Christian singles group to the family resort that day. The children begged to join the adults on what was supposed to be a brief outing to a nearby fish hatchery. Alan hesitated, but eventually gave in after being reassured. It would be short, nothing to worry about. But the short trip turned into a grueling 15-mile hike along the Big South Trail. 2 small children entrusted to everyone and to no one. The group eventually split into faster and slower hikers. Nobody was truly keeping watch, and the children struggled to keep pace. An hour and a half later, Jared was seen by the fishermen. He darted toward the hikers ahead. Whether he actually rejoined his group or was left behind remains a mystery, because in that moment, certainty ended. Jared vanished. When the group realized he had been missing for over an hour, panic erupted. Alan raced along the trail, shouting desperately into the wilderness, "They've lost my child! They've lost my child!" The sheriff promised the boy would be found before nightfall. But the sun set, darkness fell across the mountains, and Jared never returned. For 5 days, helicopters circled above. Search dogs swept the forest floor, divers scoured the rivers, and over 200 volunteers combed the mountains. Nothing. On October 8th, the official search was called off. The forest kept its silence. For nearly 4 years, the Ataderos lived with that silence, until June 2003, when 2 hikers stumbled upon something chilling. Worn children's clothes and a small sneaker, just 150 meters from Jared's last known location. Soon after, a tooth and a fragment of skull were found. DNA confirmed the heartbreaking truth. It was Jared. But with answers came even darker questions. How could a 3-year-old climb to such a remote and inaccessible location? If he had been attacked by a mountain lion, why wasn't there blood, fur, or shredded clothing? Why were his pants turned inside out? And how had his sneaker survived 4 brutal Colorado winters, nearly untouched? The simplest explanation, that Jared wandered off, got lost, and succumbed to the elements, suddenly seemed the least convincing, which left a more unsettling theory. What if Jared wasn't lost at all? What if he had been taken, and his remains placed on the mountain years later? It's a chilling possibility, and one that haunts the case to this day, because more than 2 decades later, the truth of what happened to little Jared Atadero in the Colorado mountains remains unknown. The Caracol Case. On July 25, 2019, Romania awoke to one of its most shocking and controversial criminal cases. For 15-year-old Alexandra Maceșanu, it would be the last day of her life. The day before, Alexandra had left her village of Dobro Sloveni, trying to hitchhike her way to the nearby city of Caracol. A man stopped and offered her a ride. That man was Gheorghe Dinca, a 65-year-old mechanic with sinister intentions. At first, nothing seemed unusual. But soon, Alexandra found herself trapped in a nightmare she could never have imagined. On the morning of July 25th, in a desperate attempt to save herself, Alexandra managed to call Romania's emergency number, 112, not once, but 3 times.
Sunt domnișoara, am 15 ani și ieri am fost sechestrată de către un domn.
Cum te cheamă?
Maceșanu Alexandra, vă rog, veniți repede, nu știu unde sunt. Veniți repede, vă rog.
Her voice trembled with fear as she explained she had been kidnapped and urgently needed help. She even described her location and the situation as clearly as she could. But instead of compassion, Alexandra was met with indifference. The operators did not respond appropriately, even as she pleaded for assistance. Hours passed. 19 long hours after Alexandra's first call, police finally located the house. By then, it was too late. Just 3 months earlier, in April, another teenage girl, 18-year-old Luisa Malencu, had vanished under eerily similar circumstances. She disappeared while hitchhiking near Radomir, leaving her family devastated and desperate for answers. When Gheorghe Dinka was arrested, he confessed to killing both Alexandra and Luisa. Yet during his trial, he denied everything, claiming he was innocent. In the end, he was sentenced to 30 years in prison. According to investigators, Alexandra's DNA was identified in remains found on Dinka's property, but the evidence was controversial. Some aspects of the identification raised doubts. Despite these uncertainties, prosecutors declared her dead and issued a death certificate, something her family has never accepted. To this day, both families refuse to believe Dinka acted alone. Many suspect he was covering for a wider human trafficking network, one that is said to operate throughout Romania. The Caracal case triggered nationwide outrage. Officials resigned, protests filled the streets. The nation asked the same haunting questions. How could 3 desperate emergency calls be ignored? Could Alexandra have been saved if authorities had acted sooner? Today, the case is remembered not only for its brutality, but also for the failures it exposed. Alexandra Maciușanu and Luisa Malencu were not just victims, they were silenced. And their silence left behind grieving families, broken communities, and a nation demanding justice. Their story stands as a warning, a tragedy, and a reminder. We must never ignore the cries for help from those in danger. Gabara Farah Paulette. On March 21, 2010, it seemed like an ordinary evening at the Gabara Farah home in Mexico. After returning from a short trip, Lizette Farah and her husband went through their usual bedtime routine with their 2 daughters. Nothing appeared out of the ordinary, but by the next morning, life in the household would be shattered forever. When the family's babysitter, Erica, arrived the next day, she went straight to wake 4-year-old Paulette, but the little girl's bed was empty. Panic immediately set in. Paulette had severe physical disabilities. She could not have left the room on her own. Erica frantically searched the blankets, the toys, every corner of the room. Nothing. Paulette was gone. Lizette was alerted, and the police were called right away. An intense investigation began. Detectives, search dogs, even surveillance cameras in the area were all put to work. Posters with Paulette's photo went up across the city. Lizette pleaded publicly for her daughter's safe return, even appearing on national television, begging anyone who had seen Paulette to bring her back. The disappearance gripped the nation. Prayers poured in. Media coverage exploded. Everyone hoped little Paulette would be found alive. Then, 9 days later, came a discovery that stunned the country. Paulette's body was found inside her own bedroom, hidden in the narrow space between her mattress and the foot of the bed. The revelation raised far more questions than answers. How could trained investigators, search dogs, and family members have entered that very room again and again without noticing her? How could she have been wedged there unnoticed for over a week? Lizette herself had given a television interview while sitting on the very bed where Paulette's body would later be discovered. The official explanation was that Paulette had somehow crawled onto the bed by herself, slipped into the gap, and suffocated. But many found that story hard to believe. If that were true, why hadn't anyone noticed sooner? Why hadn't the smell of decomposition been detected? The inconsistencies didn't stop there. Paulette's clothes, dark pants with pink giraffes, were seen days earlier in a TV interview with Lizette before the body was officially discovered. Bloodstains were also found on the bed, yet no signs of abuse were included in the final report. The case, instead of bringing closure, only fueled suspicion. Did the authorities mishandle the investigation, or was something being covered up? To this day, the mysterious death of Paulette Farah continues to haunt Mexico, an unsolved tragedy wrapped in contradictions, leaving behind questions that may never be answered. JonBenet Ramsey. On December 26, 1996, the Ramsey family's elegant home in Boulder, Colorado, became the center of one of America's most haunting mysteries. That morning, Patsy Ramsey walked downstairs to discover a chilling note on the staircase. It was a ransom letter, nearly 3 pages long, demanding $118,000 for the safe return of her 6-year-old daughter, JonBenet. The note claimed that kidnappers were watching the family, warning them not to call the police. But Patsy dialed 911 immediately. Officers arrived within minutes. What began as a supposed kidnapping soon unraveled into a nightmare far stranger and far darker than anyone could imagine. Police combed the Ramsey home, but found no signs of forced entry. The ransom note raised immediate suspicion, unusually long, filled with movie-like phrases, and written on paper from the Ramsey household itself. Hours later, John Ramsey made a horrifying discovery. In the basement, behind a locked door, he found his daughter's lifeless body. She had been strangled with a garrote fashioned from one of Patsy's paintbrushes, and her skull showed signs of a severe blow. JonBenét had never been kidnapped. She had been murdered inside her own home. The ransom note, one of the longest in U.S. criminal history, was left unprotected. And perhaps most damaging of all, suspicion immediately turned inward, toward the Ramseys themselves. Early on, investigators focused on the family. Patsy, accused of staging the note. John, accused of covering up. Even JonBenét's 9-year-old brother was rumored to have played a role. For years, tabloids and the public pointed to the Ramseys as the prime suspects, but others insisted the evidence told a different story. Some investigators believed an intruder entered the house that night. A broken basement window was discovered. DNA found on JonBenét's clothing did not match any family member. Shoe prints near the wine cellar seemed out of place. Yet the ransom note, the lack of forced entry, and the staging of the crime scene all pointed back towards someone inside the home. Theories divided into two camps. The family theory, that one of the Ramseys killed JonBenét and staged the scene, or the intruder theory, that someone broke in, committed the crime, and vanished into the night. But troubling questions remain. If it was a family member, why leave a bizarre ransom note? Why risk discovery by hiding the body inside the house? If it was an intruder, why write such a lengthy letter using the family's own pen and paper? How did they know the exact bonus John Ramsey had received that year? Even with DNA evidence, handwriting analysis, and years of investigation, no one has ever been convicted. Nearly 3 decades later, JonBenét's case remains frozen in time. A little girl who should have grown up is instead remembered in photographs, beauty pageants, and headlines that never faded. Was JonBenét the victim of a monstrous intruder who slipped through the shadows? Or was the truth hidden inside her own home all along? To this day, the murder of JonBenét Ramsey remains one of the most chilling unsolved cases in American history.